Answer me this. What happens when a power-mad army general wishes for nothing else in life but to have absolute dominance on the battlefield? Well, he does what any other rational thinking person would do, and barters his son's body parts away to 48 demons in return for said power. Sounds like pretty standard stuff to me. Of course, I'm talking about Dororo by Tezuka. And ladies and gents, you are watching the long-awaited 4th installment of Tezuka season. Series of videos where I take a chronological and retrospective look at the works, mangas of Tezuka, or at least the ones that I own. And today's installment is Dororo. Probably the thickest manga in my collection, coming in, I think it clocks in at about 850 pages, maybe close to 900 pages. It's very thick and very long. I spent no less than about 3-4 weeks, slowly reading through this chapter by chapter, and I have to say it was a very, very interesting reading, probably one of the most compelling Tezuka works I've read to date, even prior to the works that I've read for Tezuka season. I very much enjoyed it. Now, Dororo was penned in 1967, I believe, 1967 to 1968, and this is Tezuka's attempt at yokai manga, a subgenre of manga that was heavily popularized, like in the 1950s and 60s, by mangaka such as Shigeru Mizuki. Shigeru Mizuki is universally lauded as just the go-to guy if you are wanting to read a story concerning ghouls and demons and things like that. Yokai manga, yokai meaning monster, I believe, in Japanese. And this was Tezuka's attempt at kind of showing his flair and then saying to Mizuki, well, this is what I've got, what do you think of this? Because, there's a reference even in the story to Shigeru Mizuki himself, where Tezuka is almost like having a bit of a dig at Mizuki, which, is very interesting. Overall, this story had a lot to offer. It comes with the sort of standard Tezuka comedy and fourth wall breaks, which are always very appreciative, when reading a Tezuka manga. And I've kind of grown accustomed to those little sort of story elements, where the mangaka, Tezuka himself has kind of put himself, his own sort of outside thoughts outside of the manga to page, took pen to paper and do like fourth wall breaks. It's something you get accustomed to when reading Tezuka works. But yeah, the story centers around a Ronin samurai whose name isn't Dororo, funnily enough. His name is Hyakimaru. Now, Hyakimaru is the said infant son of the warlord Daigo Kagemitsu, who, as I just explained, for eternal dominance on the battlefield, barters his organs and limbs and senses to 48 demons in return for the said power. So Hyakimaru, he was expected to die instantly, upon birth, but he actually survived, and it's kind of like a story like it kind of starts off like the Prince of Egypt or that kind of thing, where his mother ends up putting him in like a little basket and sailing him down the river, because obviously she can't handle him herself, or it doesn't really kind of delve into why she does it, but he ends up being picked up by and found by a doctor, a very, very experienced doctor who equips him with prosthetic limbs in order to basically live and function like a normal boy. And one thing that's special about Hyakimaru is the fact that because he has no senses, this doesn't make him completely inadequate when it comes to functioning on a day-to-day basis. Because he lacks these senses, he makes up for it in other ways with extrasensory perception. So he's telepathic, he can speak to you directly to your heart, he can basically read your mind, that kind of things. He's extremely aware of demonic presences and things like that, which helps him in his quest essentially to be, to regain all the body, the body parts that he needs to get. So it essentially makes him a lot more stronger, and gives him an edge on, above his opponents. Anytime he comes across a demon that he needs to slay, he already has that ESP, strength that, he basically uses all the time to his tactical advantage. And that's what I really liked about this manga. I've heard people mentioning that it's, it can seem quite repetitive, but I never sort of got that feeling for it. I found it very thrilling anytime, it's kind of hunting down a demon. I found the action scenes to be, really well thought out and choreographed. But that's essentially what the story is. From start to finish, it's essentially Hyakimaru finding demons, slaying demons, and gaining one body part from that. But Hyakimaru isn't the only character. He's also joined by the secondary primary character Dororo, who's the titular character, but isn't the main character, funnily enough. Dororo is a little orphan boy, who basically claims himself to be like the master thief, the greatest thief in Japan or in the world, and he insists on following Hyakimaru because he wishes to steal his sword from him. That's kind of like Dororo's motive for following Hyakimaru. But the two essentially grow together, develop together, and kind of learn to cope with each other, and develop a really tight bond, brotherly bond. And it basically follows them, going from village to village, war-torn village to war-torn village, town to town, fighting demons, and just basically seeing the effects of, war, and the effect that Daigo Kagemitsu has had on the country. We're introduced to a lot of characters and locations that have just been completely decimated by samurai. Thanks to Kagemitsu, and this just strengthens Hyakimaru's resolve, to defeat his father, and make his body whole again. So yeah, I would say that this story, it gets progressively good, but the story itself isn't without its ups and downs. I don't think the manga needed to be as long as it is, as there are a lot of sort of standalone chapters that don't really serve to move the overall plot forward. And there's some characters that are kind of introduced. We get a little bit of development from them, but then they either there's a lot of characters who get killed off, and it's just it's almost like Tezuka was introducing too many sort of characters to kind of to sustain the entire story, and he felt it relevant to quickly kill these characters off, even after giving them a little bit of development. And on one side of the coin, you can say that there's no sort of plot safety for certain characters, and having a character become developed and having them killed off kind of compounds the idea of the country being completely war torn. But on the other side, on the flip side of that coin, it just seems like wasted potential, and you almost don't really want to kind of invest emotionally in characters, if you know that they're not going to get the development that they might require, because that they're going to get killed off. And this happens a lot in this manga, where like I said, you'll see characters introduced who seem important or seem relevant for that chapter, and then they'll just be killed off, and it's like, I would have liked to have seen more from that certain character, because there are really interesting story developments with certain characters that I would have liked to see more of. Things that just become unresolved. Like there's a chapter dedicated to a warhorse, and the warhorse is a mother to a foal. They get split up, and the warhorse essentially ends up getting possessed by a demon, and because it's been possessed by a demon, there's no going back from that, and it needs to be killed. But it's like the relationship between the horse and the foal, it remains unresolved, and that's something I didn't appreciate, because I would like to have seen there's some kind of resolution for the foal itself, rather than it just being left in the wilderness to just basically fend for itself, which I thought was kind of disappointing. But yeah, there are a lot of chapters in this manga that are just kind of standalone stories. some, like I said, don't really move the plot forward, but some are really interesting, and it just kind of shows and demonstrates Tezuka's versatility in telling different stories within one sort of manga. That's something I can really appreciate this manga for. One other thing as well is that the artwork gets progressively better, and this is the first manga of his that I've read where the artwork, his flair in drawing details such as backgrounds and the scenery, the countryside, things like that, really stands out brilliantly. The way he uses shading in this, rather just using lines and cross hatching, I thought was absolutely amazing. Just like horizontal lines to basically dictate the shape of mountains and things like that, was nothing short of perfection. I was very impressed with the artwork, and that's one thing as well. This is the first manga of his that I've read, during this Tezuka season run, where he's made full use of dynamic paneling, whereby a lot of the manga that I've read previously have just used kind of standard rectangular and square panel shapes, but this manga, because it's very action orientated, you find in some action scenes that the action and the choreography of the scene that's taking place dictates the arrangement of the panels. Now what I mean by that is you'll see panels that will basically sweep across the page in diagonal motions, to basically accent the movement of sword battles and things like that, and it's done absolutely just splendidly. I really liked the dynamic paneling in this, especially with the fourth wall breaks as well. Tezuka really definitely is always just a genius at that. Like there's a moment where Dororo has to hide in a vase, and he can't close the lid properly, so a woman comes up and closes the lid for him but pushes down really hard, and then Dororo ends up basically breaking through like the bottom three panels all the way to down to the bottom of the page, and the panels themselves actually crack. I thought that was absolutely genius. I mean, you see that a lot in comics and manga and things like that nowadays, but Tezuka most definitely set that precedent and standard. And for that he's just lauded, obviously, as the godfather of manga. For that, it's well deserved, I believe. Even after reading Dororo, which is I think it's kind of generally regarded not as a bad manga, but kind of like a mediocre manga, in his entire library. By no means is it a bad manga, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but I think the general consensus of hardcore Tezuka fans kind of regard it as like an okay manga, but not his best. Overall, I would definitely give this manga an 8 out of 10. I absolutely loved it. I thought the resolution of certain characters was really good, but the ending I thought was a bit anticlimactic, and I thought there could have been a little bit more development with Hyakimaru as a character and Dororo as a character, because the way it ends, without spoiling it, it kind of just reminds me of like the end of a Western, where it kind of stops before the end, if you know what I mean. The story just kind of ends abruptly, and that there's still more adventures to be had, and it just kind of leaves you with a big question mark as to what happened with these characters after the story actually ends. So I would have liked to have seen the story kind of move forward a little bit more, to see proper resolution with certain characters, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But for what it was, overall the manga was great. The designs of the actual ghouls and demons, none of them kind of they're all very much their own in terms of design, and the way they fight, and the way they sort of interact with Hyakimaru. Tezuka was just he was really versatile in designing these different characters, because obviously it's a yokai manga, and that's the sort of the main selling point for the manga. It's the fact that it's got loads of monsters in it. So yeah, that was my review of Dororo. I highly recommend picking this up. Also, in other news, I'm now a book depository affiliate, so that means that you can get basically, if you click on this link below, in the description below, it'll link you to the book depository. If you buy books via my link, I'll get commission off them sales. And book depository is great. You get free worldwide delivery, so anybody can basically use it. It doesn't matter what country you're in, because you get really cheap manga. I've used it a few times before, and they're very reliable. So if you want to buy this manga, it's still in print. It's available by Vertical, and you can get it for around £10. I think it's maybe about $15 or something like that in US currency. And the 4 volumes that it gets very much worth it. So if you want to buy this, click on the affiliate link down below. And yeah, support the material. So yeah, thank you guys. That was Tezuka Season Episode 4. Look out for Tezuka Season Episode 5, where I will be reviewing Triton of the Sea. So until then, see you later.